All right, now that we've introduced the MaterialApp widget, let's talk about how to tell Flutter exactly what should be displayed on the screen. As you can see, simply using MaterialApp doesn't provide enough information on its own. To make things clearer for Flutter and indirectly for RunApp, you need to provide more details inside those parentheses of MaterialApp. As we've mentioned, simply using MaterialApp isn't enough. We need to be specific about what we want to display within our app's UI. So MaterialApp requires parameters within its parentheses, which specify what should be displayed. But this isn't just any parameter. It's what we call a named parameter. In Dart, the values you pass to a function like RunApp are matched by position to the parameters listed in the function's definition. For example, the first value you provide is mapped to the first parameter, the second to the second, and so on. Now, as we see here in MaterialApp, there's another method to pass parameters in Dart, which you'll become quite familiar with as we progress in this course, which is named parameters or named arguments. So these parameters, or the inputs of this construction function, which is in Flutter world called Widget, these parameters can be passed in two main different ways, either positional arguments or named arguments. Positional arguments are straightforward. Values are passed directly in the order the parameters are defined. In contrast, named arguments add a layer of clarity and flexibility. When you define a function with named arguments in Dart, you place these arguments inside curly braces. This method allows you to specify which parameter you are setting by name, regardless of the order. It's incredibly useful for functions that have many parameters or optional parameters. Let's take a very simple example to illustrate the difference between these two types of function inputs. We'll use DartPad.dev for easy demonstration. For those who are completely new to programming, a function is a group of statements designed to perform a specific task. We call this function by its name whenever we need to repeat its task. For example, consider a scenario where we need to multiply elements across two columns, each containing 1,000 elements. Instead of writing the multiplication operation 1,000 times, we can write a function for it. All right, let's start by defining a simple multiply function in Flutter. We'll call this function multiply. This function will take two inputs, multiply them, and then print the result. First, I'll define the function by typing void multiply. The void keyword here means that this function isn't going to return any value. Now, I need to specify the parameters this function will take. I'll add xy right after the function name. These are called positional arguments because the value of x and y depends on their position in the argument list when you call the function. Now, let's move inside the function. I'll type the opening curly brace to start the definition of what our function does. First, I'll declare an integer variable m to store the result of x multiplied by y. Here, we are declaring m as integer. We will see all the declaration types in Dart soon. Then we have to add a new line to perform the multiplication. M equals x times y. After we have our result stored in m, we want to print it. So I'll type print m, which will output the result to the console, and then I'll type the closing curly brace to end our function. Now let's call this function. I'll go to our main entry point of the application, and inside here, I'll simply call our multiply function with two numbers. For example, multiply 5, 3. This will pass 5 as x and 3 as y to our multiply function. When this line executes, it will print 15 to the console because 5 multiplied by 3 equals 15. This is a very basics of how to create and call a function using positional arguments in Dart. The order in which you pass these arguments matters a lot because each position corresponds to a parameter in the function definition. If you mix them up, the logic of your code will be affected. This is a basic concept you need to understand when working with positional arguments in functions. Now let's see how we can redefine the same function using named arguments. The basic difference is that the parameters or the inputs of this function are going to be wrapped inside curly braces. Now we see an error as we change the function from positional argument to named argument. Coming back to where we called the multiply function inside main, here, we have to make some changes, and precisely, we must specify the arguments by name. Like so, we have to name the x and add colon same for y. So the error will disappear. This method of naming arguments not only enhances readability but also offers more flexibility since you don't need to remember the order of parameters, just their names. It's particularly helpful for functions with many or optional parameters. Most built-in functions in Flutter are using the named argument style. So coming back to Visual Studio Code, as we build our first Flutter application, you'll notice that the MaterialApp widget makes extensive use of named arguments. To demonstrate this and to explore these parameters further, you can view the original Dart file for the MaterialApp by pressing Ctrl or Command on a Mac and clicking on the MaterialApp widget. The file that opens contains the original Dart code for the MaterialApp class. Here you can see all the parameters for this widget are enclosed in curly braces, indicating that these parameters are named arguments. This means that for MaterialApp to function correctly, we must specify its arguments by their names. From this list, one important parameter we need for continuing to build our app is home. Here, the home parameter specifies the main UI component that our app will display. Another very useful way to explore all the parameters of any widget, especially within your IDE, is to utilize the autocomplete features. For instance, you can press Ctrl-space. This brings up a list of all the parameters you can control within MaterialApp. Understanding how to access and use these parameters is crucial when working with widgets. Once you identify the widgets that will be used in your code, it's important to explore these parameters and adjust them to fit the vision you have for the UI you are building. In the next video, we will explore together what we will display in the home of our app. Stay tuned for more insights as we delve deeper into Flutter widgets and their properties in our upcoming sessions.